Greetings from the U.S. We are Frank and Beth Radcliff. In this video, we're going to continue to discuss the concept of family fabric, focusing today on making memories. This is one of our favorite concepts from Sam and Jerry Lang's book, The Essential 8 Principles of a Strong Family. During our discussion groups in Southern Africa, this was often the topic that brought the most interesting stories and fun conversations, and we're looking forward to sharing some of those with you today.
As I think of intentionally making memories as part of weaving our family fabric, I imagine those memories being kind of the bright spots, the flashes of color in our fabric that we cherish and come to love in the years to come. You know, in the Old Testament, God helped the Israelites weave their family fabric. Part of that was by asking them to celebrate special days throughout their year. Some of these feasting days were very sober, somber days, times of remembrance, such as the Day of Atonement. But others were days of celebration and gratitude, days like the Feast of the First Fruits or the Day of Pentecost. And others of those feasts had to be a lot of fun. During the Feast of the Tabernacles, God asked the Israelites to build booths or small tents and asked them to live in these tents for the 7 days of the feasts while they remembered the time that the Israelites wandered in the desert. And I can only imagine how much fun that must have been for the children, running between the tents and playing with friends as they celebrated that memorable feast with their families. You know, all these feasts were accompanied by special sacrifices, special foods, other customs, similar to what our traditions do today. And you can read about all these feasts in Leviticus 23, in Numbers 28 and 29, and in Deuteronomy 16. You know, because Jesus grew up in a Jewish home, we know that he would actually have celebrated all these feasts himself. But we also see that Jesus enjoyed and even celebrated the simple things in life, the ordinary days of life. You know, in John 2, we read that Jesus was at a wedding, and that's actually where he performed his first miracle, changing the water into wine. You know, Jesus loved being with people. We know that he ate meals, and many times with the sinners and tax collectors. That was the reputation that he had in the Gospels. And you know, we all remember the story of Jesus on the mountainside, teaching the crowds, and then how he fed the 5,000. Every gospel records that story. And if you can just imagine what that memory must have been like for the people that were there. You know, in our walk with God, it's really important that we learn things like how to love God, how to obey him, how to repent, how to have a sense of that mission that God gives us. But I think we also see a God who wants us to remember and celebrate life every day. So now I just wanted to share a few memory-making, life-celebrating ideas that I have heard recently as we have been experiencing this pandemic together. You know, when I think of the tents that the Israelites spent time in during the Feast of the Tabernacles, it reminded me of my grandsons. 2 of my grandsons wanted to go camping, but obviously in this time of the pandemic, there was nowhere they could go. So their dad took them outside and they camped out in their own backyard. And I think the boys just loved sleeping under the stars with their dad, even though their house was just a few feet away. But that's a memory that they will share of this time together. You know, another of our daughters has a standing family pizza night every Friday. It's something that she and her family have done for quite a long time, kind of part of their routines and rhythms that also is, it's a memory for them. You know, they get together every Friday night, they make their homemade pizza together, and then they all have share a time either with a movie or playing games together on Friday night. And it's something the kids still look forward to. One of my daughters said that a week or so ago, her little 5-year-old said, "Mommy, how many days till pizza night?" The kids look forward to it. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised if these two grandchildren, when they have children of their own, don't institute a family pizza night in their families. It's part of their family fabric. And finally, I wanted to share a story of some people that you all may know, some dear friends of ours in the Soweto region of the Johannesburg Church, Fix and Kiso, sent pictures to us recently of an anniversary that they celebrated during the pandemic. You know, when you think about that, celebrating an anniversary during the pandemic is something that you could have just said, oh, we'll worry about it later. There's too much going on or not going on to do it now. But instead, they chose to make it a really special family memory. They, both of them dressed up with fancy clothes. Their sweet little daughter got all dressed up. They had a photo shoot and took lots of pictures. Someone made a cake. I'm not sure who made the cake, but they had a beautiful cake, and they had juice out of wine glasses and sat outside at a table and celebrated the anniversary of their wedding. And I thought, what a wonderful way to build family fabric. You know, that could have been a day that they just overlooked, but instead they made it into a day that I think all of them will always remember. You know, in this challenging time for so many of us, let's remember that we actually are still weaving our family fabric. And I encourage you to look for opportunities, whether big or small, to continue to make memories with your family during this time.
Thanks, Beth. You know, it's really going to be interesting to see what we remember most about this time when we look back on it in the days, weeks, months, and in years ahead. You know, what's going to be our biggest memory of the lockdowns and the period of being restricted? What will we remember? You know, it may be some of the things Beth mentioned, some of those intentional things that we did, some of the celebrations, some of the fun things that we did with our children in particular, some of the funny things that they did that we remember that happened during this time. You know, for some of the families, it may be a very special memory. I'm thinking of the Kindangwes, the Shumbas, and the Chipunzas in Zimbabwe, and also the Malayas in Zambia, that in each of those families, they've seen one of their children make the decision to say Jesus was Lord and to be baptized into Christ. Those are memories that they'll certainly have of this time and that brought those families together in a very special way. I'm guessing, though, for some of you, some of the memories are going to be of some of the harder times. You may remember sibling battles and conflicts and things that happened between your children. There may be a time where you lost your temper. There may be other things that happened, like job loss or loss of a family member, or things that you normally would have been able to do to support each other that you couldn't do during this time. And sometimes those memories are challenging for us in how should we think about them and look back on the challenging times. I'm reminded of what God said to the Israelites back in Exodus chapter 13 as he was instituting and telling them about how they should celebrate the Passover. And in Exodus 13, starting in verse 3, it says, "So Moses said to the people, 'This is a day to remember forever. The day you left Egypt, the place of your slavery. Today the Lord has brought you out by the power of his mighty hand.'" And as you look a little further down in that same chapter, he tells them some of what they should specifically do in terms of helping create that memory for their children that may have not even been born yet, or their children that may have been too young to remember. And it says here in verse 8, "On the seventh day you must explain to your children, I am celebrating what the Lord did for me when I left Egypt. This annual festival will be a visible sign to you, like a mark branded on your hand or on your forehead. Let it remind you always to recite this teaching of the Lord. With a strong hand, the Lord rescued you from Egypt. You know, notice what the focus here is in this passage. It's not on what the people did. It's not on what they accomplished. It's on what the Lord did. It's how he brought them out of Egypt, how with his mighty hand. You know, and if the people focused on what they did, if you go on and read in the next couple of chapters in Exodus, you'll find that after pretty much every one of the miracles, the people started complaining. They grumbled against Moses. They grumbled against God. They wanted to know why he brought them out into the desert. They were afraid they were gonna die. And all of those things happened with the stresses that happened because of those events. But what God wanted them to remember was his power and what he could do. So one of the questions for us is, as when we look back on this time, what lessons has God taught us? What things does God want us to remember in terms of ourselves or the world around us? That God is at work. And the question is, are we going to look to see what he's doing within our lives at this time? You know, as we think about memories, some of those memories are memories that we can create, that we're in control of. Some of those things are things that are intentional, as Beth was mentioning. But other things are things that we have no control over. And this time, we don't have a lot of control over the things that are happening. Either what's happening in terms of the virus itself in many parts of the world, or what our governments have decided to do to try to fight that. The question is, what are we learning from God? And as we conclude, I want to leave you with just a few questions to discuss with your spouse or with someone close to you. The first question what are the best memories you have so far of family time during this lockdown? Secondly, what other ideas do you have for celebrating and making memories during this time? And then lastly, what are some of the challenges you've experienced where you need to remember the lessons God has taught you, and maybe what have been those lessons? We continue to pray for all of you. We love you, and we ask that God bless you and your lives during this time.